We want to thank you so much for joining us today for our Engineering and Operations Management Lunch and Learn webinar series. In the College of Engineering and the Industrial Engineering Department, our programs consist of a Master of Science in Operations Management, Engineering Management, and Engineering. We also have graduate certificates in Project Management, Lean Six Sigma, and Homeland Security, and we'll cover those a little bit later for anyone who might be interested in those. So I want to welcome everybody again. My name is Karen Hickenbotham. I'm the Program Manager in the MSOM program. We ask that all questions be typed in the chat box at the end of the presentation, but we're going to have a little bit different format today. So if you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to type it in the chat box. This is going to be a little different format today, and I'll get to that in just a second. This webinar is also being recorded. It will be posted in our ScholarWorks at UARC collection in the Operations Management Presentations folder. So thank you again, and we will go ahead and get started. So I mentioned that for today's webinar, we're going to try something a little new. In the past, we've had more of a traditional webinar. And so today we're going to take more of a podcast type format where two instructors are going to discuss human factors and change management and how those two actually complement each other. So getting to our first presenter today, we've got Jeff Bean. And Jeff is a lifelong learner with a learn-it-all personality, as he notes that he learns as much, if not more, from teaching, as he has taught and designed several courses in operations management since 2007, all while maintaining a full-time corporate career. He was most recently a senior international consultant at Leggett & Platt, a 100-plus-year-old global manufacturer, where he focused on solving problems at the intersection of people, process, and technology. This included cybersecurity training, user experience, technology adoption, and employee engagement, among others. His professional experience began with a 10-year career in the YMCA, which including serving on the national faculty as well as the operational roles across multiple business units. Following his MBA, he worked in general management, retail business analysis, did consulting work, and worked as a contract writer in business and psychology. He was employed as a national account manager for an F1000 firm to manage relationships with some of the country's largest organizations. During this time, his career grew to include operations, business intelligence, and strategy roles as well. At present, he has completed all coursework for his doctoral degree and recently defended his research proposal for his dissertation in organizational development at the University of Arkansas, where he expects to complete this in the next few weeks. So congratulations on all that success, Jeff. Our second presenter for today is Travis McNeal, also an instructor in the MSOM department. Travis currently works for Deloitte Consulting in their org transformation practice. Prior to joining Deloitte, Travis worked for Walmart, serving in roles in their supply chain organization, technology, international, and global HR, supporting large-scale changes. Prior to joining Walmart in 2011, Travis spent 8 years with the Continuous Learning Group as a senior consultant. During that time, Travis assisted clients implement performance management, leadership development, and talent management strategies. Clients Travis has consulted with is ExxonMobil, Kroger, J.B. Hunt, PPG, CN Rail, Chevron, and Cigna, just to name a few. Travis earned his bachelor's in psychology at Utah State University, where he also earned a minor in human resource management. Travis then earned a master's degree in behavioral psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno. At that time, he also worked as a human resource generalist for Tahoe Pacific Hospital and Health South Rehabilitation Hospital. Travis lives in Bentonville, Arkansas, with his wife of 24 years and his 4 wonderful daughters, ages 18, 15, 14, and 12. I bet that is a very busy household.
I like that wonderful descriptor.
So let's get to it. Today, I am here to present Jeff Bean and Travis McNeal on human factors to organizational change. And again, this isn't going to be a traditional webinar with many slides. We're going to kind of do a podcast type format. And so we'll go ahead and just let Jeff and Travis begin. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks very much. It's an exciting time. And you're probably wondering, what in the world are we going to do? And we're wondering the same thing. So that's a neat thing. And we'll talk about being agile and the importance of that a little bit later on. But Travis, I got a question for you to kind of kick us off.
Let's do it.
Organizational change, it seems like it's kind of a hot topic these days. What is it? Why do organizations even want to change? What's going on?
Again, if you think about it, especially if you think about the times that we've lived in with COVID, there's tons of change that organizations have had to make. And so when you think about organizational change, it's easy to break it down by just saying, someone has to do something differently. And when someone has to do something differently, we like to say, well, then that means what they have to do is going to be different from how they've done it before. And anytime you do something like that, I once heard a presenter say, we become kind of a senior beginner is how they described it was,
It's a
that's a
good one.
very uncomfortable spot for people to be in. And so, but there are ways that that organizations can help those associates or those employees who do have to do something differently to make it less confusing, maybe less uncomfortable for them, and make them more willing to adopt these new ways, new processes, new technologies, whatever it is that they're adapting to, a little bit more palatable. And that's what organizational change is really intended to do: is to think through all of those various components that are required, and they're needed for organizational change that really help make that transition much more smoother.
So as organizational change, does it focus more on the individual change or more on the organizational piece? I mean, organization's in the title, but
hmm
is it go down to that level?
Um, Yeah, it goes down to the individual level. Some people might talk about it at an organizational level, but when you think about an organization is made up of people, and that's really what the organizational change tries to do: is really get to the individual level to really think through, what's the impact going to be to the individual person. Now, granted, then you extrapolate those impacts from a single individual to multiple people, and you develop your strategies based on that. But it really is looking at the individual impacts to the people.
Okay. So it's interesting. So we have this organizational level, we have an individual level, and this course that I do, this human factors bit. If you can imagine a unit underneath the individual, even that's where that course kind of comes in. And the first few weeks of the course, we're talking about perceptual inputs, really just the information that comes in, how we process it from the colors we're able to see, the sounds we're able to hear, the range and stuff like that, to take it to a little bit higher level, to cognitive uh, levels where we process that information. And it sounds like, just right off the bat, from what little we've talked about so far, that if you could imagine a little bitty tip of a funnel or a triangle, and then it just goes out to the organizational level, it sounds like these two courses are really kind of a potentially good fit for one another.
I'd say so. And while we're on that topic, Jeff, maybe you could, I know just recently you went through a redesign of the human factors course. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what were some of the key things that you approached or that you took different to this course that really enhanced it from the previous version.
Sure. Sometimes when you ask a college professor or an instructor a thing, a question, sometimes we do this funny thing. We tell you how to build a watch versus telling you just what time it is. So I'm trying to balance these two here versus really just kind of getting in there and tell you this answer that is almost meaningless. So I can tell you that as we started the design, Dr. Rich Ham and I in the program, what we were thinking about is that the course varied quite a bit from instructor to instructor, depending on kind of the old parable of three blind men and an elephant, or three blind people, to use the modern phrase. Depending on which part of the elephant you were talking about is kind of the angle that that particular instructor did. So we're looking to take it out to something more generalizable. And so we did a short survey of the program to think about what are we doing and what are we doing really well. One of the things we're doing really well is some of the work that you had done with organizational change management and others, Neil Jeffries and some of the other faculty, and I'm sure Dr. Greg Parnell can jump in here a little bit and give a commercial for some of the other stuff in that area. But those are some of the things we were doing well. But this course it had lost its identity a little bit. And so as we looked at, well, what are we doing well? Where are the gaps at? And we're missing a big piece that's highly relevant in a lot of industries. that's relevant in safety, which is relevant in a lot of industries. It's relevant in aviation, military, law enforcement, industrial settings, medical stuff, and all that. And so I remember your question. Your question was, what is this human factors bit? And I've told you a lot of stuff, but the very best thing is actually better than what I came up with. It's what a student came up with when I asked them to kind of summarize their course experience. Karin, if you would put that next slide on, and I know people can read very well, so I'm going to let them read about what this human factors course really is, and that's what we developed it to be. We take a couple of things, the perceptual inputs, the cognitive inputs. We kind of have a frame of the scientific method around it of structured problem solving so that we can prove we actually do something and how to engage and wrestle with it. And what you see on the screen, which at this point you should have already read twice, that's what we do. So it's kind of an exciting course. I think it's just a ton of information. It's unbelievable how much information is in that textbook and how much we elicit from the students. That's why I say I learn as much every time I teach as anything else.
And so, Jeff, as you now that you taught this redesigned course a few times, what have you found that's been the most, I don't know, the most valuable thing that the students have taken away? Like, what do they enjoy the most about having gone through that course?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. The and you've got some younger children, and I think they're all over third grade, I believe. They're well past that. But I think these days, I've got a couple of nephews that are younger. I think they're teaching the scientific method in third grade these days, which is amazing. Well, I didn't learn it until high school. Uh, that being said, the scientific method is how you approach a problem. So if you're in a boardroom and you say, well, I think sales are going to be up this year, or I think we need to look at our costs, this use of I think, no place in there. It doesn't matter what you think. Maybe people like you, maybe they don't. But if we can get out the ego of the first person pronoun, and if we can replace think with data suggests based upon pilots or these experiments, or we can get permission to do something, to run an experiment, a pilot study to test, then we can bring data and maybe extrapolate from there. So I think that's one big thing. The other part is this course involves group work a little bit where folks get together. There's such a diversity in our students. You've got folks that are aspirational and on their way to great things. You've got people that are already doing great things. And those are the two kinds of people. They're either already doing it or they're on their way. And you put them together and you mix them up and stir them and kind of poke them a little bit with a good challenge and a problem. Um, and it's amazing what comes out. And so they're applying this stuff in their area of interest. So if I got three military fighter pilots, or maybe they're not fighter pilots, maybe one's a transport pilot, one's a fighter pilot, and the other flies helicopters. So three very different aircraft, but they're all pilots in the military, maybe different branches of service even. They have a common shared interest in that. And so their project will be very applicable to that situation. So that's two of the things that they take away from it. So.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that they're bringing their own practical experience. Because to me, from what I've learned in my time with the MSOM program, is that there's this applicability portion, and we do the same thing in organizing for change, where one of the very first assignment that students bring to the course, that for their very first week, is they have to identify a project that they are currently working on or part of, through one of their organizations. Maybe it's through the company they work for. Maybe it's through a sports program that they lead, whether it's a youth sports, or maybe it's through a religious organization that they may play a large role in. But they're asked to bring a real tangible project that they're a part of, or maybe it's something that they want to make a change within their organization. And we walk them through each week through various components of that to build out that what we call the change management plan for them. Because you can do all the project management stuff, and that's perfect. But if you don't take into account the things that happen to the people, which sometimes organizations do, they focus on the triple bottom line, which is are you on time, on budget, and does the process or technology work? But then you also got to take into consideration, are people using it? Are people adopting it? And that's really I think the beauty of not just your course or this or the Organizing for Change course, but several other courses where they ask students to bring in real practical examples they can wrestle with and fight with and really begin to think through all the implications.
Yeah.
So glad
I
to
know
hear you
you've
say that.
done, yeah, know you've done this course a couple of times, and you bring out this example business and real life applicability. While I don't want you to disclose any information that you shouldn't, like, the name of a company or the name of
Sure.
individuals, but what's an example of something that your students brought or something like that that really had an interesting impact, or a student that really vaulted ahead in their career by applying it in that course setting, that
Hmm.
sandbox?
Yeah. So there was one in particular who um, they were working they were working for a warehousing company. And one of the things that that they struggled with, well, they didn't know they struggled with it, but they were their productivity within their facility they thought was where they wanted it to be. And there was a measure that was an industry standard measure, which was OEE, operating equipment effectiveness, which basically the easiest way to think of it is what percentage of the day is the equipment running and are we producing? And producing in a warehouse is how many boxes are moving through the building. What's the throughput like?
Hmm.
And they were sitting at around 50 to 60%. The problem with this
Wow.
company, though, was they were comparing themselves against themselves. And so, and this person felt like, you know what, I believe that we can improve. And so they did some benchmarking and found out, well, you know what, industry standard is actually 85%, OEE. So we've got
Wow.
some work to do. And they identified, a couple gaps in productivity where it was at the start of the day and the end of the day that there was and again, they ran through you look at a Lean Six Sigma, they have a term called Tim Wood, which is where do we identify the waste? And where they found out was that there was a lot of standing around time. Waiting time is what Tim Wood would call it, is waiting time at the start of the day or at the start of the shift and at the end of the shift. And they felt like, you know what, if we could, squeeze that time in just a little bit, we could really make a huge improvement in our productivity and in our OEE metric. And
What's
so
that word you used? Is it like some guy's name, like Tim Wood,
it's an
or is it?
acronym. It's an acronym.
Okay,
So
what's that mean?
TIMWOOD. So Tim
Okay,
Wood. And each one stands for, I think it's time. I'm gonna have to look it up, but time.
yeah, they can
Um,
Google that. That's easy.
yeah,
We don't want to
but
give them everything.
when you're trying, what this student did was they leveraged some Lean Sigma tools to help them identify, well, where are we seeing the most waste? If our OEE isn't where we want it to be, and then how do we improve it? And then that's where the organizing for change piece came in. Is that, if you don't message it and you don't communicate it and you don't build the right kind of leadership or sponsorship support, that can come across to associates as, well, you're just trying to make me work more hours of the day. Currently I'm feeling good. I go home at the end of the day feeling rested, and you're saying, yeah, well, you know what, you're not being as productive as you need to be. So you need to be very thoughtful about how you actually communicate that and how you prepare your managers to interact with their employees to make sure they truly understand the real reasons why. And that's where, Jeff, you pointed out in, when you go through a human factors analysis, is really try to dig into the data and then using that data as a way to help people understand the why. Because there was a study done, several years ago by the conference board, and which is now Gartner, and they assessed 427 companies, and about that had gone through changes, and they came down with basically 7 principles. And I found it interesting that 2 of the principles that they identified in those companies where they went through organizational changes is that, employees don't need to like it, whatever change it is that you're doing, they need to understand it. If they can understand it, then there's a lot greater acceptance of whatever that program is. And then the other thing is, that employees, it's not about how you communicate it, it's just how well prepared they feel for that specific change. So if you do those 2 things, if you explain to them, here's the reasons why we're doing it, and here's the skills and tools and capabilities you need to be successful in this new way of working, that just increases your chances so greatly in terms of adopting it. And so that's what this one student did in particular. I know this is a long-winded answer, but that's what
That's
that one
awesome.
student did in particular, was really help plan out, well, what are the key things that we need to tell them about the data. Hey, we're not best in class. We think we are, but we're not. Here's what the data tell us. And oh, by the way, did you know that if you can stretch out your day, that actually is going to add more money to your pocket because you're based on piece rate. And so if you can increase the amount of volume that you flow through the building, that's going to help your own personal incentive. And plus, when you look at it, most of those employees, They want to be productive. They want to contribute. They don't really in for the most case, people don't like to be sitting around on the clock just doing nothing. And so this gave them a way to really help, feel like they're actually contributing.
Yeah. Having been in industrial settings before, there is a huge focus on productivity, and that can come across a lot of times as directed at an individual. And sometimes it is, truthfully, but often, like you were saying, it's about leveraging the equipment. And I've been in industrial settings before, and I've told people, I want you to be the laziest employee. I want you to let the equipment do the work. I don't want you guys picking up pallets. I want the forklift to do it. And I want that forklift to take the shortest possible path
Yep.
between 2 points or the conveyor or whatever equipment it is. So that messaging and communications is huge, even if the outcome is kind of the same. So I would
Yep.
suspect that's a huge part of change management is how you
Hmm.
communicate.
Yep. So Jeff, tell me a little bit about again, if all the students that you've had come through that class, the human factors class. What has been some of the topics that they might actually struggle with a little, and struggle meaning something that they have to wrestle with, that they have to think
Yeah.
long, deep, and hard about.
I'll tell you the simplest thing that's the hardest thing. And this is an interesting thing, of course. I know I've used thing a lot, but hey, words are free, right? So, one of the things that I ask them to do, and it's so important that we do it twice. We kind of divide our accelerated 8 week semester into two 4 week sections, which the first 2 weeks we kind of focus on the scientific method, and then the next two we kind of split into two projects, and they're using the same tools to approach these projects in a little different way. But we want to get to, and this goes back to that scientific method, the idea of a testable problem statement. It sounds so simple, uh, but I want them to create one sentence. One of their assignments in 1 week is create one sentence that's a testable problem statement that uh, if you do this thing, then this result will likely be the case. So you have a comparison situation, you have an intervention built in there, and you have a hypothesized outcome. Now, like your one group, that experiment you mentioned, they were comparing themselves to themselves. So that can we
Hmm.
be better? Yes, in a world of continuous improvement, you can always do better. But you brought in a kind of a breakthrough idea with let's not compare ourselves to ourselves. Let's benchmark performance in terms of industry. So when you create that testable problem statement, it's so simple because it's just one sentence, but it has so much packed into it in terms of setting up the experiment that you're going to hypothetically be designing to determine, is this going to be better or is this going to be better? Is it going to be safer? Is it going to be faster? Is it going to uh, require less inputs? Is it going to get greater outputs? What are the variables? And that's something that this course, um, I've heard of expressed this way because we're teaching the graduate school. There's what they call the undergraduate dilemma, where is if you have an undergraduate as clever as they are, and you ask them to write a 5 page paper on Walmart or some huge topic, education in America. They're like, oh my gosh, 5 pages. And again, this is probably old, and undergraduates aren't probably like this anymore. But amuse me. Then there's what we call the graduate dilemma, which is I need you to write a less than 25-page paper on some very narrow aspect of some very specific thing. And the response is, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get all of that into less than 25 pages? So I'm asking
That's
them
so funny. Yep.
yeah, to take this very simple concept and just get it out. That's a real challenge. It's a challenge for me. It's a challenge in the workplace and
Hmm.
every day.
Oh, great.
What do your folks struggle with?
I'd say there's one topic in particular that I think we spend more time on, like in terms of bantering back and forth, like in their discussion groups and through the chat and through emails and that sort of thing. And that's really around. We have a section where we really try to, how do you measure the change? How do you measure the program? Because that's one thing you want to try to do is, are we better off having gone through this change than before?
Right.
And so getting them to wrestle with what those metrics would be, I think is it takes time, and it's not something. And this is no fault of the students, and all the companies that I've consulted with before, that's still a challenge for them too in the situation when you so how are we going to be better off? Well, we'll be happier. Well, what does that mean, and how does that benefit the business? Because when you think about it, when you're trying to articulate what those behaviors are, there has to be some value to the organization. Otherwise, the organization will lose focus. Whereas if you think about the strategic priorities of an organization, if they're a strategic priority, they're going to be asking questions about it quite regularly, and they can define what those are. And so, getting the students who take the class to really think through about what are some of those metrics, both the leading and the lagging. I think that concept of leading and lagging
Yes.
can be elusive to people. And
Yes.
the best way that I have found that's been the best way that I think has resonated with the students is I think about safety glasses, to help them connect the dots between what's a leading and a lagging. And leading in that case would be, wearing safety glasses. That's something you can see every day, multiple times a day. Are you or aren't you? And you can track it. Are they yes or no? And what's the percentage of time you
Hmm.
could if you wanted to, but that does have a corresponding relation to eye injuries. If you wear your safety glasses, you should see less eye injuries. The eye injuries is downstream, and so that's a lagging metric. And even lagging down from that is number of think of incident rates and that sort of thing. So
Right.
you can see how that there's like a continuum. And so getting students to wrap their heads around that, I feel that's something that we talk about quite a bit every term, or only because it is kind of an elusive topic to a lot of people. And again, this is not specific to people who take organizing for change or who are in the MSOM program. It's all the companies that I've worked with. It's not something that is just easy to think through, and it can be frustrating. Think, well, how do I measure that? How do you measure manager effectiveness? How do you measure manager support? I find that sometimes students get pretty general in their behavioral descriptions. Well, my manager needs to drive change. Well, if you were to ask 10 managers, do you drive change? They would probably say, well, yes, I do.
And
And
everybody's above average.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that's something else that we spend time really thinking through is, well, how do you define, good leadership, good leaders who lead change? What things are you looking for? If I, who know nothing about your business, were to go on into your organization, what could I see and what could I hear that would tell me that yes, that manager is, checking the box in terms of being a good change leader versus those that aren't. And so those are some of the things that we battle with and wrestle with and really try to figure out how granular can we get.
Yeah,
And
that
then
sounds very similar to that testable problem statement that you work all this time to get this thing that you can measure and compare to see is it really better or not. So there's a
mhm,
lot of similarity in that.
I would agree. So, hey, why don't we take a pause here and see if there's any questions that people have, and then we can go back to our discussion. I certainly don't want to leave the people who are attending, see if they have. Don't
I'm
leave
just
them out of
having
the
a
party here.
I'm just having a good
I
conversation
know,
with you. I don't there's people here?
I know. We'll give
Carmen,
it a
are there
couple
any other
seconds, see if there's
questions?
any questions that anyone wants to ask, and then if not, then Jeff and I will jump back into it. Because Jeff and I could talk for just keep on going
Yeah.
and lose
We're just
track of
getting warmed
time.
up. We'll tell you how to build all kinds of clocks.
Yeah, if anybody wants to utilize the chat section, or even if you're able to unmute yourself, we don't have that many people really on. So if you want to verbally ask Jeff or Travis a question or have a conversation with them, let's do it. This is very interesting to me. So
Oh,
uh,
it's very interesting. Absolutely. There's no doubt. It's interesting. So, hey, while we're on, I thought I saw Dr. Parnell on here. We always like to give a shout out to him if he's on and available. Does he want to say any
I
impart words of
think
wisdom?
I think he was on, but I think he had to jump off. But I do see Leonard here. Leonard Nethercutt is another one of our MSOM instructors. So
Absolutely.
Leonard, thanks for joining. If you have any comments, we'd love to hear anything.
Aside from unqualified endorsements and stuff like that, I mean, that we've had enough of that, both Travis and I. So we do have some instructors here, and this is not. I mean, it's kind of the Jeff and Travis show right now, but really, there's a whole lot of people that go into making this program a huge success, including Karin, Carol Altum's on here. She's one of our administrators. Leonard, as Karin mentioned, is just a phenomenal instructor. Mindy Hunthroff, who keeps us all in order by herding cats every day, all day, is phenomenal. So there's a lot of people on here that make the program work, including either students or prospective students. So if there's any questions, whether you're a student or not, I mean, questions are free. The answers may vary, but questions are free.
Well, and I know we have kind of a mix of people, and I know there were some alumni that signed up, and we've got some current students in the program that maybe were interested in these two courses because they've seen them on the class schedule and maybe considering taking those as an elective. And then I know we have some prospective students on here that are maybe thinking about applying to the MSOM program or maybe even
Yeah.
one of our graduate certificates.
Yeah.
So
Let's talk. If more questions come up, let's do it. And let's you think about folks thinking about the program and stuff like that. Let's explore a little bit further, maybe. There's so much. We have lots of talking cues here. But where our programs touch together, I started this very smallest part of this little funnel and go out. And like the last week in this course of human factors, we start talking about organizational factors. And that really is a good segue into what Travis does. So Travis, in terms of thinking about the relationship from my, or not my course, it's the course I just happen to be the steward of at the moment. Uh, and yeah, I built it, but still. Um, it's clear how this course, Human Factors, segues into that. Are you seeing any, from what you've heard about human factors so far, are you seeing any of the flip side of measurement? It sounds like some of that productivity measurement and your eyeglasses, safety goggles, was really spot on to some of the applications we have in this course.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of and I was thinking about as we were preparing for this, Jeff, wondering, so what is the right order? Is it organizing for change and then human factors, or human factors and then organizing for change? And I think the answer is I don't know that it's as important, but I will say I think there are some advantages to taking human factors first, only because if you're getting that foundational knowledge, say, well, how do I go about testing, and what data can I look at? How does the data impact people? And how does that impact the organization? Testing those hypotheses. I think that's a great way. Once you've done some of that and have that kind of background way of thinking, as you transition into the organizing for change class, because then that way you have some data to go off of. And to me, I think when you're trying to go about communicating the benefits and the why for your whatever change program it is, getting that data-based information, I think, is a huge seller to employees. Again, even if it's a change that employees might not like. Again, going back to that research study where they said, I don't have to like it, but I got to understand it. If they can say, hey, you know what, if we don't start getting 85% OEE, no one's going to be shipping through us as much as they are going to be the guy next door. And if that doesn't happen, then that way we won't be able to attract and recruit the correct kind of people. And if we're always training and recruiting people, that's going to make it more frustrating for you. But if we can keep people in here, if we can pay them top dollar, that will just make our whole life a lot better. Plus, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to, beat their competitor. In a good way.
Yeah.
People are competitive, and so if they can, beat their competitor, that's always a very that's a reason for people to want to get out of the bed every day and go into work and do the best that they can.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think taking that human factors course does add some advantages, is because it does help some of that context to help communicate those benefits of the change to others.
Yeah, and I want to respond to that a little bit too. And while I'm responding, Travis, we do have a question in the chat,
Sure.
and I'll let you take first shot at Ian's question here, but I'll give you probably 30 to 40 seconds to think about that. So, hitting the timer button. I think Travis made a great point with human factors could be a great foundation to segueing into the broader organizational piece. In fact, the human factors course kind of takes that micro level and then moves up. However, I would not want that to be seen as a substitute for having to choose one over the other, or not taking one because you think you're out of order. The organizational change management, I can tell you what one of the most famous quotes that I've ever heard, and I don't know who said it, but it's famous. It's that famous. Nobody even knows who said it anymore. Is that the only constant is change. And so learning how to be agile within an organization is going to definitely help you in your career because you're going to see change management take on a bigger role in courses. Yeah, I think human factors can be a great foundation, but don't let that deter you from just picking that course either. So, Travis, I'm going to turn it over to you. How does somebody get a career in this area, whether it's human factors or change management?
Yeah. I can speak specifically to change management, and I think Ian, you had mentioned here, is it consulting based or is it in an organization? And the answer is both. You mean as Karen mentioned earlier, I started out in consulting, went internal with Walmart for almost the same amount of time that I was a consulting, and now I'm back in consulting. And so you can run the gamut. And to be honest with you, there's most large Fortune 500 companies, even some that aren't Fortune 500 companies, recognize, and Jeff pointed out earlier, they recognize there's this need to have to implement changes in a better way than they have before. And by doing that, most people have stood up, some in some cases it will be a centralized team within an organization, meaning they're the ones. And oftentimes you'll find them sitting either within the strategy group, PMO, and less mature organizations when it comes to change management. You'll find them often in HR. And to be honest, that's where Walmart found their centralized group was in HR. Walmart has evolved to a space where they've decentralized their change management capability. And what I mean by that is instead of having a centralized body with a VP, senior director, director, and analysts, you now find there are managers out in the various pockets of the organization. They're a community, but they certainly don't report into one centralized group. And they talk with one another, but they design strategies, change management, communication programs specific for that function. So you might have, we were Walmart not too long ago was leading a huge enterprise data management program, and they had two or three change management people focused on just that. When I was in supply chain at Walmart, I was, part of two or three people team focused on change management and supply chain. There was another team that was, focused on change management inside the retail company. And so that's how Walmart had their internal change. I would say all told, there were probably at least 20 to 30 people within Walmart who had some form of change management responsibility. And now there's consulting firms that you can get into, and even if you were to go type into LinkedIn and type in jobs and change management, you'll get a net result of about a couple thousand jobs out there. And so organizations do recognize this is a skill that they need, that they're doing two things. They're bringing it in from the consultants if they don't want to pay for it long term. They'll bring them in for specific projects, and that's where consulting firms come into play. So I hope I answered that question for you well enough. Jeff, how
Yeah,
about you?
I'm going to throw some things out there on that one because it's a great question. And I'm going to answer it kind of two different ways. One, to get a career in the area of human factors, human factors spans so much that there's a number of potential entry points in there that you could be in an organization in a role that does that thing. That's one way, in which case you're probably going to have a couple of different courses in it, maybe not a major, maybe not a degree, but at least some demonstrated coursework and potentially some applications in that. And I'm thinking of there's so many different career fields. Um, a lot of quality improvement, safety roles are often very human factors driven, cognitive psychology. It could be your job and you could get into that field, or another thing is it could be a part of your job. So I consider myself to some extent, I mean, if I'm an expert at anything, it's learning and teaching. That's kind of the thing. I consider myself to be learning agile. And with that, I don't have a degree in learning, but I've been practicing it in a business career and in a teaching career for the better more than 15 years. So you can apply a discipline within the broader concept of a job. So for example, maybe you're a product manager at a company, which is kind of a popular thing. You could apply the principles of change management or human factors design within that job to do it, the job. And then you could build a portfolio based upon that. And then there's an opportunity in large organizations like, you know what, you've shown us the value of doing this. Um, I think we're going to create a full-time position with this or make it a larger part of your job. So you can create jobs and jobs get created and you can build a resume through applying those skills in the course of doing a job that at face value doesn't seem to be that thing. So, and by that, if you were to ask me, how do you get to be a swim instructor? Which is something I used to do a long time ago. You're not going to get a college degree in it, but I'd say, well, you know what? Once you become a lifeguard first, so once you're a lifeguard, then you've kind of got the skills and you're at the pool where this other stuff's going to happen. So that's kind of the answer to that. But you can also do a lot of stuff. And one of the things I don't do a good job at in this course, this human factors course, that it's getting to be such a hot area, is user experience. I mean, it's a digital world these days. And so we touch upon it. And the tools that you use to work on, a lawnmower are pretty much the same tools you work on a high-end automobile, which are pretty much the same tools that you use to work on a jet. The tools are kind of the same. The thing you're working on may change a little bit. So this user experience, it's a really hot career field these days, user experience, UX design. It's applying these principles that we're learning in a digital world. If you put something on this part of the screen, is it going to be better than that part of the screen? Well, I don't know. I mean, there's some perceptual issues in terms of color that I could use, some compliance issues to make it more accessible. But often companies, organizations, they don't know. So what do? They set up an experiment. They have a testable problem statement, and they've got people who are data fluent and know how to understand data and statistics to determine, you know what, this one is not as good as that one, or vice versa. And so you set up these experiments, and in a digital world, experiments happen really fast because you can run good numbers just really quick. So that's kind of my take on careers. You leverage it to grow into a career, or you could apply it and then move in what I would call a more linear career fashion. Travis, what else will we add? What do we miss there?
No, I think you got it. Carol asked one, and then Stacy. So we'll go to Carol first, and let me take a crack at this one, Jeff. Feel free to
Yeah, please.
bolt on to what I have to say. So Carol, you're talking about how important is communication skills, and how does leadership fit into change management? That's the perfect question. If I could have seeded a question, Carol, that would have been it. To be honest with you, fantastic. So I'll give you kind of how I've seen it play out through my career. So even though I might be quote unquote responsible for change management within I'll just use supply chain when I was with Walmart. I did very little like myself actually doing the communicating, because my perspective is that the people in the organization, they don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from their manager. And so I felt that my role was to help put managers in the best position to communicate to their teams. Sometimes that included writing entire presentations for managers and leaders. Sometimes that included creating um, um, talking points. Sometimes that included filming a manager, talking about the change, giving them the talking points that they needed, but having them talk about whatever program it was that they were leading. And throughout my career, that's exactly how we positioned it. Is we might be responsible for the change, but at some point the leader needs to be the one to take over. And so our role is when that transition begins to, and one of the methodologies, Kurt Levine, we talk about it in HR, and we talk about it in organizing for change. Levine, it's spelled Lewin, but it's pronounced Levine. He describes change as you have a unfreezing, a transition, and then a freezing. That's the kind of one of the most simplest ways to describe change. But when you're throughout that entire process, the manager or the leaders are the ones who need to be talking, not the program team, I mean, we can be there to support if we have to, but they don't want to hear from us. They want to hear from their manager and their leadership. And so that's what I believe is a responsibility of the change management team, is to give the communication skills to those leaders. So I don't know if that answers your question, but communication skills are important, but it's more about the communication skills of the leadership, and how do you prepare them, put them for success.
Managers have a lot to keep up with these days, and
Hmm.
they're given more. I mean, everybody does. It's a digital world, and we're connected like ridiculously. And so you're preparing them and supporting them in that way to give them the talking points and making sure they're sticking to the framework and addressing the key things to really help everybody feel better about what they do. So that's an excellent story of how change management integrates with leadership. And you can be a leader and a change manager. They're not mutually exclusive. And if you're that leader that's already proficient at change management, you'll recognize its value. You may require less help and less selling, if you will, and more support. That's a good one. Well said, Travis.
So it looks like we've got two more. We've got Stacy, and then we've got Celeste, who we just featured, one of our student testimonials. Congratulations to her on upcoming graduation. But we're zeroing in on the 1 o'clock hour, so we'll go ahead and get to Stacy and Celeste, and
And
then
I thought this went till 3 o'clock. We stop at
I,
1.
I I believe that you could talk till 3, but this is only an hour.
We're professors. It's what we do.
So we'll get to Stacy's question. It looks like Travis, that might well probably to both of you actually.
Kick it to Jeff. I spoke a little bit about this earlier, so let's let Jeff take a crack at this
Yeah,
one.
I'll start it, then Travis will correct me. That can be great. So, uh, Stacy, hello, hello again. That is, you're correct. I did that human factors course was built to be pretty scientific, and the course text. I mean, it's a chunk of firewood. I mean, it's a dense book full of information for one, and I don't expect everybody to remember everything. I wanted to get you exposure to some of that stuff as a foundation, but that scientific method, that testable problem statement, I've used that my whole career. I use it at the highest levels of what was then a Fortune 500 company in the boardroom in terms of how I communicate by getting rid of the first person ego pronoun. Doesn't matter if they like me, if they don't like me. I don't want that. I just want to be the data. Here's the data. Here's the proposal. And it is very data driven. And I think that's what companies are looking for these days. And I think it also in this day and age, I think I can't believe I just used the word I think. I know data swears to us that we all need to be more inclusive and aware of people different from ourselves and points of view that are different from ourselves. And we must consider others. Uh, and we can't get too caught up in this I think and I wish and I hope and feel and believe. Doesn't matter. Data is where it's at. And if you can bring the data, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, yellow, green, from Mars, purple, it doesn't matter. The data speaks. And so that course is very data driven. And I want to cultivate an enthusiasm for that as well. And we don't have to have complicated data. It doesn't have to be big data. It doesn't have to be crazy statistics. Just a simple t-test. Is this statistically different from this? Is it better? Is it worse? And there is amazing value in not knowing uh, something and knowing you don't know it. And there's amazing value in that, you know what, there is no statistical difference between these two. But just to know that is huge. And I think as you transition, I can't believe I use the word I think, that is from experience, although I'm sure data would, if I had the time, I could support it inside it. Data would tell you that as you craft organizational messaging, that you can have a leader that everybody loves and likes, but if they can point to a bigger thing than themselves, a transcendent vision of where we as a company inclusively are going, that change is much more likely to be embraced and successful. Travis, I'll kick it back to you to correct me there.
No, I think you're right. I think the only so I think your question, Stacy, gets around. How do it's a little bit more scientific, a little bit more data driven with human factors, and then you get into change. It's a little bit more soft and a little bit more theory based. 100% right. And I think again how those two complement each other is you got that data based approach, which really lends credibility to when you're trying to roll out a program. But when you're rolling out a program, you can't discount the fact that there are people that you're trying to, when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with people who just by nature of who we are, we have emotions. And so how do you, deal with those emotions? And managers really do need to get better at how they manage some of those emotions. No two people are the same. And so how do you, tailor your message to fit and motivate the people at that different level? But and then you come back to the data by saying the whole reason that you're going through a change is that you expect your organization to be better off. And so then you come back to the data to say, are we in fact better off? When you're talking about just use a technology program, you want adoption. And that adoption, I think that word to me cuts across many different programs. When you describe, have we reached our goals in terms of managing this change? Well, are people adopting it? If people are adopting it, for an extended period of time, then you can reasonably say, hey, we feel like we're in a good spot. So that's how I see those coming together. You have the data on the front end. You can't neglect the emotional creatures that we are, and then you bookend it with another set of data that says, yes, we're accounting for all these emotions, but are people doing what we ask them to do? So, and that's how I would say, kind of you wrap the entire package. So
Yeah, data can say that you're happier. You can prove that people are happier now than they were, that they're better off, that their lives are more enjoyable, and data can show you the soft side of things too. So that's a good answer.
mhm.
So we got a question from Celeste on recommendations for alumni. I can tell you what I do. I teach. That's and I don't think you have to get a gig at U of A or any other institution to do that. You could be a teacher in your organization, and you could put an onus upon continuing renewal of information because they say hypothetically an undergraduate degree has what a statute of limitations or something like that, maybe 7 years. That if you took something that the world has evolved so rapidly that not all the stuff you learned back then, so you have to be in a continuous state of renewal. There's so many things. Professional societies are outstanding ways of doing it. And I'm sure we could both throw a ton of books out there. But Travis, what would you say to Celeste's question?
I would say the exact same thing. And from a change management point of view, there is not a company, but there is um, I don't know what you call a group out there called the Association for Change Management Professionals, ACMP. That's a similar thing. They hold conferences every year. They have, LinkedIn website, places where you can go to get that information. And that's a good way to keep your skills honed in the change management space. Now, there are also several consulting firms that are out there that, that have their own change management methodologies. And, working for Deloitte, we have our own change management methodology. I have found that most of them are about 70 to 80% similar. There's several of them that are promoted throughout, not promoted, but one of the things that we do in class is, we do a critical evaluation of some of the methodologies that are out there. There's John Cotter. He's, many cases, people consider him the godfather of change management. And he wrote a book many years ago that we actually use in this class. You might remember, Stacy, having taken the class, called Leading Change. That's a seminal book on change management that you should really, if you haven't read it, I'd go get it. There's also ADKAR, which is, again, if you think about, there's another practice out there called ProSci. If you look at jobs on change management, I'd say probably 50 to 75% of them will say, ProSci certified. That's probably the most well recognized certification in terms of change management that you can find out there. But my experience is, I think I'm less tied to a methodology personally. I think all of them have value, and it just depends on how you use them. So getting some certification in any of those methodologies, I think, would serve you well, at least in terms of managing change. But there, as Jeff said, there's, we could give you a list of, 5 or 6 books each. My favorite that we use in class is a book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. That's just a favorite of the students. They love that. There's lots of good stories in there, and they frame it in such a nice, simple way. That'd be one way that I just continue to if you want to continue learning, couple hints for you.
Excellent. Cara, I know we're getting kind of close to the time limit of 1 hour. I can't believe we just allocated only a single hour to this. That's mind blowing. Who came up with that idea? 1 hour, nuts. But is there anybody else that wants to say anything, or do you have any transitions or
Yeah,
any
I saw
parting
Rich
words?
joined.
we can give
Yeah.
we can give some folks a little bit of time for some final thoughts and just quickly For those who are not aware, maybe not in the program or thinking about the program, we do have an MS in Operations Management and an MS in Engineering Management. We also have 3 graduate certificates in Project Management, Lean Six Sigma, and Homeland Security. For those graduate certificates, I want to point out that they're only consist of 4 classes. You can obtain that as part of your master's degree without taking any extra classes because they're going to double count. They can also be completed as a standalone program, only requires a 2.5 undergraduate GPA with no GRE required to turn in your scores. And it's also an option to, if you want to, say, try out our program and look at project management, you can also transition into the MSOM program that way as well. And we just want to point out that even though we are still currently dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, effective for the fall 2021 term, anyone who's wanting to apply to the MSOM program, we are waiving the GRE for anyone with a 2.5 to a 2.99 undergraduate GPA. But of course, once hopefully things start to get back to what we will consider normal from here on out, the testing centers, once they resume operations, the admission requirements are going to go back into full effect. So again, I don't see any more questions coming through for the chat. So I want to thank, first of all, foremost, Jeff and Travis. What an amazing conversation and very creative, I might add. So I've really enjoyed working with you on this event. I want to let everybody know that the next webinar is going to be May 12th. It's going to wrap up our academic year. Topic is going to be cybersecurity supply chain risk management by one of our MSOM instructors, Cheryl Garner. I do want to point out that registered participants are going to receive an email with a video link to this webinar. Please share with your colleagues, with your supervisors. I think this was a very, very important conversation that I think no matter where you're at, this touches you in some sort of way. And so what I'm also going to do is I'm going to compile some of those reading materials that Jeff and Travis kind of mentioned. I'm going to include those in the email. That way you guys, everyone will have those to refer back to. So thank you for attending. Jeff, Travis, great job. Glad to see everybody online today. If you have any information or need any information about our flexible degree options, you can email me. Again, my name is Karen Hickenbotham, or check out our website, operations-management.uark.edu. So Travis, Jeff, thank you again.
Thanks. Hey, if I can
Thank
just
you,
plug,
Karen.
I'd love to hear, other people's feedback on this format. It was the first time we tried it. I'd love to hear, did this work? Is there anything we could do differently to make this format a little, better going forward? We'd love to know. So
Absolutely, great point. And so I will include all this in a follow-up email. So thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of the day and rest of the week, and everyone stay safe.